Hey everybody, I'm Rachel. You may know me. You may recognize me from the internet, where I'm generally known as Rachel Fenichel. You may have seen me on our GitHub, you may have seen me on the forum, or last year at this conference. I've been on the Blockly team for 4 years now, so I've been working on it for a while. As Eric said earlier, we can blame Neil for a lot of the decisions, but I've been on the team long enough that now you can blame me for a lot of the decisions. This talk that I'm going to give is about how I decided that one of Neil's decisions needed to be replaced, so I've replaced it with my own set of mistakes. So I'm going to show them to you. I'm really excited about them. I do think that it's a significant improvement, and I'm also really excited to turn it loose in the world and find out exactly what I got wrong on it. So, go. Just a quick roadmap for this. I have 45 minutes for this talk. That's a pretty long time. I'm going to start off with a show and tell of all the new stuff we've been doing. I'll talk a little bit about our motivation, and that'll be kind of that's what's backing all of the decisions that we're making. And I'll also talk a little bit about extensibility and how we've planned for extensibility. After that, I'm actually going to pause and do questions about that high-level stuff, and then once we've done questions, I'll move on to some deeper dives about all of the details of it. And that can flex time-wise depending on what we have. And tomorrow we have a hackathon, and rendering is going to be one of the themes for that. All right, so with no further ado, because I was told that I should put the show and tell first, that I shouldn't talk about this with no pictures, this is Garrus. It looks exactly the same. 100%. That was hard. Okay, so this is a completely new renderer under the hood, and it looks the same. This is our compatibility renderer. The goal here is that if you are happy with the old renderer, or in particular, if you have a lot of user-facing stuff that involves screenshots, a lot of user-facing help, and so on, you shouldn't need to update that all at once. So we have this renderer. Garrus is approximately Greek spirit of old age. I got a little too clever on the naming, and I get to put names into our codebase and leave them there for years, so that's great. So this looks all the same. If you find things that are not the same, you should tell us. We will do our best to update it to stay exactly what things looked like in the past. Garrus is live in the Q3 release. So that release we have as a release candidate right now, and we will be releasing that early next week. You will get this immediately. Next up, we have Zelos. Zelos is not done, as you can tell. All right? Zelos is similar to Scratch and MakeCode. So this is going to be those blocks that have the hex corners for Booleans, that have the rounded corners for values. They're going to embed with each other. Notice that they're generally bigger. They're more touchable. So these are better for kids. These are better for touch environments. You should expect that this will look a lot like Scratch and MakeCode by the time we're done with it. And in fact, one of our goals is to decrease the fragmentation that we've got in terms of Blockly forks and make it so that it's easier for them to just use our base renderers directly. This is a work in progress, and Sam has done a lot of work on making this go. So thanks a lot for that. Zelos is approximately, again, I don't speak Greek, spirit of eager rivalry. Okay, and we're targeting Q4 2019 to release this, and it's already on our playground. You'll be able to play with it. Feel free to report things. Understand that we are still making lots of progress on getting this to look exactly right. Next up, Grassos. This one looks very, very similar to Garrus. There are a few things that are different. One thing that you should be able to see is everything in that top row on the if block is centerline aligned vertically, which is a request we've had for a while. You can also see that the print block is not tall enough. My bad. I'll get it. And you can also see that on this one, we don't have the drop shadow. We may switch it to have a border instead. So this is, we're saying the next generation. This is spirit of boldness. This is where we put all of our new ideas. And the plan here is that we're going to be able to gradually move forward with changes to the look and feel of Blockly while keeping the same basic vocabulary, the same basic way of having all the blocks look. so that this should be familiar to anyone who's continuing to use it. And if you don't need exact pixel perfect matching of your rendering, we will suggest using this. This will update over time. We're still making decisions on what exactly that update is going to look like. This is going to be less static than Garrus. This is also on the playground, also a work in progress, obviously. We are open to suggestions. We're also trying to fix a lot of the kind of things that we've known about for a long time, but that the old renderer didn't allow us to fix. So we're working through that backlog of bugs right now. There's one extra renderer in the playground, and this one's called the minimalist renderer. This is just a starting point, so we threw in some extra files. This is not currently released or anything. It's never going to be released, in fact. These are files for you to get started on building your own renderer. So this is just the very bare bones of the renderer. We're making it so that you can easily start using that, start building your own thing, get it live in the playground immediately. And so you can see that this, by default, has a certain height, has a certain spacing between things, and doesn't really do any special considerations for making things match nicely between a block and inputs on that block, and so on. Yeah. If you join the rendering hackathon tomorrow, that's going to be your starting point for that. Last one. I don't know what it's going to be. You're going to make it. I'm excited. So we know we've been getting requests for a long time to be able to get different renderers. We're still trying to figure out what that's going to look like. As we see things from you, we'll also be able to pull some of those into ours, which we're excited about. All right. And with that, let's go over to the playground. Oh boy. This is not my laptop. That may have been a mistake. Nice. First try. Okay. So the first thing that you should see here that is totally visible and not hidden in all of the other boxes at all is we've got a new dropdown over here. And that dropdown may or may not eventually open up on there. I have my mouse on it. This one right here. Okay. I can see a dropdown on it. Apparently you can't. We're going to pretend. It should say Garrus, Thrasos, Zelos, Minimalist. Okay. So the playground by default obviously still has all of our normal blocks. Flipping through this, nothing should look different, but if I swap this, it'll reload the playground with a new renderer in place. Try Zelos. That also changes the URL that you're going to get up here, so you can change this with renderer equals whatever if you want. And with this, we get a completely different renderer swapped in. And this is where we're going to be playing with things generally. For those of you who aren't familiar with the playground, this is our this is where we as the team test things that we're building into Blockly. And it's also where we recommend that developers test their blocks and other things where you're looking only at does it work inside Blockly, completely aside from whether it works when integrated with the rest of your workflow. So we have this, and it honestly is more exciting in terms of what's behind it to me than it is in terms of what you're going to see. So I am doing my best to be excited at you about it. Okay, there is a connection somewhere here. I'll find it one day. Going through the rest of them, let's see. Let's pull up Thrasos. Okay. And toss some blocks on the workspace. And then, oh no, I can't get it to right click. Oh dear. Try that again. I pull some blocks out here. One thing I want to show you is we've also got this little drop down over here for themes. So for instance, I can set up Thrasos so that now it has those borders around it as well, which looks a lot nicer than if I just have it on its own. So that's the playground. It's got some helpful stuff over there. Can't put 1 + 1 on the if. We're going to move on from here. Live demos are always difficult. Okay, where are my slides? before we move on to questions, a little bit about our motivations for making this change. So the block render is a really core part of Blockly, and as such, it's one of the oldest parts of Blockly, right? Like what Blockly does is that it takes some text, some definition of a block, and it turns it into something that you can put on the screen, you can interact with, and users can interact with, and then it turns it back into text again. So the renderer is really core, but one problem with that is that Blockly, as it was originally written, did far fewer things than Blockly does now. And this renderer has definitely accreted a lot of code over time. I had two big goals on this project. One was code health, and the other was flexibility. So the block rendering code has been a struggle for us because it's a large amount of code in one place. It's very interconnected and very hard to modify only one piece at a time. I'm seeing some nods from around the room, and I'm assuming those are people who have done this and who know the pain. Okay. So code health, we want that better. We want it also to be easier for you to do merges. We think that having forks that are able to stay in line with mainline Blockly is another part of code health. And flexibility. This is really, again, in response to stuff we've been hearing. People want different connection shapes. We get this all the time. People want to be able to tweak the block shapes in a variety of ways. And people also want to be able to switch between different renderers without having to completely have different forks of Blockly. So that led to a couple major decisions. First is that it's a complete rewrite. The block render SVG file is gone. It is no more. You will never see it again. That's pretty big for us. Instead, I've replaced it with something like 17 files. It was doing a lot. We'll talk more about exactly what those files are later. Fortunately, it's not that many at one time. Okay, the next was the decision to support multiple renderers. So part of this was that we built out these three different base renderers that we're having in the library, Geras, Thrasos, and Zelos. As part of this first pass at rebuilding the renderer, we did that so that we had some experience with what APIs people might want before we put it out to you. So we have worked on how do you switch renderers, how do you tweak only small parts of it, and so on. And that also means that we decided that we as a team are going to be supporting multiple renderers going forward. We're going to have multiple in Blockly in the library that you'll just be able to choose between. And the third is that color handling is actually done with themes, which Abby will talk about more. So color and shape are less tied together than you might expect. And so we've actually separated those out. Together we get shapes and colors and then, sing ABCs and so on. You'll get a chance to play with both of them in tomorrow's hackathon. And actually, I think what we found when we were brainstorming for this hackathon in terms of what people might want to do is that a lot of things that come up obviously as customizations to blocks can actually be done by changing themes without changing the renderer, which was a goal. All right, and how do I use them? I assume that is one of the questions. So first off, Geras, out in this upcoming release, it'll be the default. If you have not modified the renderer in any way, this just will work. This comes in immediately and easily. If you have modified the renderer, this is going to be much more painful. I apologize for the amount of pain. I'm happy to work with you to try to figure out how to build your renderer out on the new stuff, and I think it's worth it. Zelos, Thrasos, and Minimalist are in the playground. Zelos, we're targeting release in Q4 2019. And Thrasos, we will make decisions on as we have that diverge a little bit from Geras. And there's a hackathon coming up. I said later today, I believe it's actually tomorrow, for you to play with this. And a little bit about extensibility. So we did make decisions for this renderer based on what we know people have wanted. These are some of the things that we tried to make easy. So adjusting spacing, that kind of falls in with if you want to make things more touchable, bigger blocks without changing anything else, that should be easy. Alignment, both vertically and horizontally for things, should be easier. Swapping connection shapes is something that we've paid special attention to. And also new input shapes, like this one I've got up there that actually came from App Inventor, where there is a input that looks kind of like a statement input, but with a value connector instead. Making something like that should be very easy in the new renderer. which is good because Evan made a pull request on that I haven't reviewed. Yeah, closing pull requests is great. Okay. And the question marks there are because this is what we anticipated, and I'm sure that we're going to find new things that people want to do with this as we go. I'm excited to find out what they are. I'm also a little bit apprehensive, obviously. Okay, question time on this. We're at about 10:30, so I have plenty of time after this for the rest of my talk, but for now, questions, high level? Yes. All right, we have a question from Becca who says, are there places that shouldn't be touched right now since things are still in flux? We are still working on the direct APIs for swapping in different parts of this. So making changes in those minimalist files to start figuring out how to build out your own renderers should be good. One thing in particular, the way that you define the shape of a part of the block, so the way you define the shape of a notch or so on, that's a object. We're working on what the structure of that object should look like. It will have certain basic information, so if you make it now, you'll be fine. You may have to tweak it slightly later. That's about what comes to mind for that, though. It's generally, I think, pretty good. Anyone else? Yep. So the question was, how radical can you get? Don't have a skateboard with me. Also can't ride a skateboard. And some of the examples were, what if you want to make blocks round, for instance, or what if you want to have your connections, your outputs on the top or bottom. Came up earlier, that idea of having a block that's kind of stacking your blocks vertically with input connections on both sides. All of those should be possible, actually. I'll go more into that on the deep dive, and I think that'll explain why that should be possible. It's also because we have provided a way to register a new renderer where you have a single call to it that you have to provide, and so worst case, you can go really far afield as long as you meet a certain basic description of it. So again, we're kind of making this transition right now between Blockly as something that we happily tell people how to change every single file directly versus Blockly as something where we provide the APIs that you're using. And so that should support really weird renderers. And if you make ones that are round and so on tomorrow, that would be great. Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at my slides again, but that's not it. Next question. Going once. Is there a scope or a spec for animation? No. No, I didn't think about animating parts of the rendering, man. Ah. Right, so there's a question about animations, and in particular, an example of detaching and whether that can be done smoothly and so on. Yes, there actually already is a block animations file in Blockly that handles there's a little jiggle when things are disconnected and so on. I haven't explicitly thought about animations as to how they fit in here, so we will explore that. Saw another one? Yes. Okay, that one was about morphing blocks on the fly as you are debugging to give better feedback. I think that actually is more around mutators. So that should be completely possible with defining. You have to define arbitrarily complicated mutators, but that shouldn't actually touch on the new rendering, other than if you want to add slightly different shapes around where your debugging information is and so on. I think I saw one over here. Ender. The question is whether there's something that says I need to re-render based on things changing shape. We are doing a better job of marking when things need re-rendering explicitly. I will have to think about that more. I don't think we have anything really focused on that. Favorite thing that I changed about the new render. There's this one function in the old render, and I deleted it. And that one function was the entirety of the old render. Since it went in one go. Sorry, Neil. Getting rid of again, I'll dig into this more, but I separated completely the drawing side of this and the measurement side of this, and that just feels so much better. My favorite part about it is actually debugging with it, because I can reason about it. I spent a significant amount of time building out the original Scratchbox renderer, along with Caitlin and some people on the Scratch team, and that was pretty painful. So going back, encountering the same code, finding similar issues, and this time being able to say, oh yeah, it's probably in the function with this helpful name that measures this exact thing, is just, it's a much better feeling. Highly recommend doing things twice so that you know exactly which pain points you're fixing the second time. Neil's pointing out that the old renderer worked on his screen because it was in landscape mode. Sorry, no, portrait mode. Yes, and that mine are flipped the other way, and so I naturally prefer multiple smaller files. Anyone else? Yes. Okay, I think that was having inline and non-inline inputs on the same block. That is not currently baked in, but I can see a pretty easy path to it, and it's something we've heard enough about that I will eventually have that in Blockly as the library. If some of you implement that immediately because that's the thing that you want, and you send over the code so that we can take a look, that would be great. Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? All right. For the rest of this talk, I'm going to do a deep dive into the architecture of the new rendering code. This part is more exciting because showing you a picture of the exact same thing but built differently behind it is like kind of anticlimactic. So this is the part where I get to talk about what I've been doing on this. And the timeline on this has been, I've been working on this pretty hard in the last 6 months or so, and there were 3 years before that of wrestling with the rendering code and thinking about all the parts that I wanted to change. So this is kind of a culmination of all of that. Starting out, what's a renderer? So it translates a block model to SVG, dynamically lays out a block on the page. So you provide a block definition. You also may provide XML that has additional specific values set or connections between blocks. And we put it on the screen and it looks like this. That's all the renderer is. It's pretty straightforward. So that's what I meant about how we have a pretty simple API for you to do the render call, and so you'll be able to replace things behind that API fairly well. I've divided it into 2 steps. We have measure and we have draw, and that's all we have. Okay? And this is where it's pretty distinct from the old renderer, is actually that previously we were kind of mixing together measurement and drawing. There was a good reason for this. A lot of the measurement takes multiple steps. You take multiple passes over and over and over the information on the block. But you actually can do a lot of that kind of inline in a single pass if you are careful about which information you keep around. This made it significantly shorter to write, honestly, and it also made it um it made the code take fewer passes over it, which is nice. Um, but it also meant that it was very hard to change because if there was something that you wanted to change that was already fixed by some point in the code, you didn't have a clear way to indicate that you wanted to go back and change that. So this completely separates it. You should know everything before you start drawing. Okay, inputs to rendering. We have a block definition. So that's that JSON that we had, or you might build that in the block factory. That says things like how many inputs you have and what fields are on those inputs. We have layout rules. Rules can be really simple, like we could say all value inputs are inline, right? It can be more complex, like I had to look this one up. A statement input at the end of a block is twice as tall as a statement input in the middle of a block, for instance. So you can have different rules for different renderers. And then we have some constants. So those constants are things like what's the minimum height of a block? What's the default padding on a block? And path shapes. So this is kind of a vague term here, but what I'm saying is that you have the shape of your notch on the top of the block, or you have the shape of that puzzle piece that we have as the output. And we need to be able to specify those as both what the path is and what space it takes up. And then we have these ideas of what we're calling measurables, which are telling us about the bounds of subcomponents in the box. So these handle things like, okay, an inline input is going to be the size of the output and also the size of whatever whatever block is inside it. We're going to have to go measure that. And in the case of Garrus, it also has a little bit of extra padding. Things like that. On the other hand, the outputs of this are really simple. We build an SVG path, we push it over to the block, and then we also update connection positions. So we have all these connections, they say where all the other blocks are around this, and we do have to update those if we change, for instance, the width of a block. Connection positions will change in line with that. So here's a little bit about where that is in code. We have block SVG, which you're familiar with, that has the block definition. We have some new files. We have info.js, and info.js has all the rules about layout. We have constants.js, and that has both the basic constants like max, min, width, and the path shapes, those more complicated ones. And we have this directory of measurables that has all the different ones. So what does an inline input look like? What does an external input look like? What does a statement input look like? And the outputs are set in the drawer file. The big idea for the new rendering is that everything is a measurable, and that a measurable is just a rectangle with some fancy clothing. Okay, so a block is a collection of non-overlapping measurables for the most part. And what this means is, for instance, if you define a field, and partly thanks to the work that we have on the new fields, if you define a field, you should be able to say, my field fits in a rectangle that is 5 pixels by 10 pixels, and the block should tell me where to put that on it. And I will never extend outside of that box that I said I'd be in. And that means that we can line things up. So you can say, I have a field, the next thing I have is a spacer, the next thing I have is an inline input, and those should be non-overlapping. The result of this is it's possible to fully measure a block before starting to draw. And basically all of our math is really simple. We're not doing stuff with paths. At the point that we're measuring, we're just doing things in terms of where are all of these different rectangles. Measuring. We measure everything before we draw anything, and the object that we make out of that is called a render info. Drawing. So here we have a couple things. There are three basic parts of our drawing pass here. We have drawing the outline, so that's the actual shape of the block. We have drawing what I'm calling the internals. Those are all the things that are placed inside the block. That's fields, and that also is inline inputs. Notice that external inputs, external value inputs and statement inputs are handled as part of drawing the outline. Okay, so we draw the outline, we draw the internals, which mostly means positioning them in the correct place, We tell fields, you're going to be over here, you're going to be over here. And then the last thing we do is position connections, which you'll see with those little dots on there. So we tell them where they are on that block. Okay, and to make this a little bit more concrete, I'm going to go back over to the playground and I'm going to show you something that I'm really happy with, and I hope you'll be excited about too. Or it'll break. These are the options. Confident, they said. Okay, so I've got something over here that says enable block rendering debug. It's a little checkbox over here. When I toggle it, I get some other stuff underneath it. And then let's go look at that other stuff. I can turn on elements and it'll show me where things are. Yes, you are impressed. Excited about that. All right, so you can see these black squares on here are showing where all the different elements on the block are. And so we can see that we've got one over here for if. That's a field. That field takes up a very small amount of space. You can see that we've got one over here for the statement input, and that's actually significantly bigger. And if I go add another block in here, and then zoom out, interesting, didn't resize. I'll deal with that. This one is the one on the repeat is bigger though. Actually, the one that's on the statement input here is correct because it's showing the size of the statement input inside this if block. Okay. Switching over to Garrus, and let's try this again. But this is that one in particular is showing the size of the statement input inside of that if block, not including any additional stuff outside of the bounds of the if block. And then I can also add spacers. So these pink rectangles that turned up are all of the spacers that I've got on here. And I mentioned before that spacers are one of the easy things to change. So this is all horizontal spacing. What's the spacing between things sideways on the block? And I've also got some that handle vertical spacing. There are fewer of these on here. Those are blue. If I turn all of these on in one go, there's going to be a lot on this block, so I'm going to turn a few of them off. So pink are the element spacers, and blue are the row spacers. Other things I can turn on, I can actually turn on rows as a whole, so these red ones. If for anyone who's colorblind, I apologize about the colors. Also, for anyone who's not colorblind, I apologize about the colors. I built this as a tool for myself. I showed it to a few people, and they said, hey, can we have that? This is stuff that's built into the playground right now. It's not shipping, but you can easily go and tweak it to actually show exactly what you want it to show. Let's see. And also, we have connections. We get these highlights that show you, these dots that show you where the connections are. Excuse me one sec. And we have smaller dots for previous connections and outputs, larger circles for next connections and inputs. And so one of the things here is that if you're debugging the renderer that you're building and your connections are in the wrong places, you should be able to see that. These won't line up. When everything's working fine, everything on here just looks right. It's when things go wrong that this is especially helpful. And nope. Apparently I don't get more on the page. There's another rectangle, or there's another checkbox down there to show the bounds of the block and the bounds of the block and all of its connected blocks. I thought I could. Nope. Gonna move on because I don't want to worry too much about that. But this is on the playground. I think it's fun, and this really, I think, then also gives a little more meat to that idea that everything on the block is a rectangle. So the way that I used this while I was debugging is that I would turn this on, and that would show me, this is basically the result of my measurement pass. This shows where, yes. Nice. Yes, here we go. Okay, so I also get block bounds, which are dashed lines, and turn these guys off. There we go. So you can see the block bounds, and then I also get another one for showing the size of connected block bounds. It's especially useful because one of the big bugs that we have is where the connected blocks actually size themselves completely differently. And this is one of the ways of finding that out. So this is basically a visualization of the results of our measure pass. We have everything, we know these as these rectangles, and so the first check is, are things correct from the measurement pass? Once things are correct from the measurement pass, once things are spaced correctly and so on, then separately you can start to debug, am I actually drawing notches in the places that I said those notches would be, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that was debug rendering. And now we go into the deeper dives. This one went on for a while. Like, building this took a long time. Okay, block construction. Just gonna run through this pretty fast because I think a lot of this is really familiar. We've got fields, we've got inputs, and we've got connections. Fields define UI elements, strings, images, so on. And Becca's gonna talk a lot more about them later. And we also have inputs. An input is a sequence of fields, generally. It may end in a connection. We basically have value inputs, statement inputs, and dummy inputs. Value inputs may also be inline. So when I said that measurables are non-overlapping, the lie there was that inputs contain other measurables. That shouldn't be a surprise. That matches with what we do on blocks generally. And connections define how a block can connect to other blocks. Okay, so here's our sample block. We're going to decompose this a little bit. So we've got a previous and a next connection, one value input, and 3 fields on there. And so we can decompose this first into rows. We have a top row, an input row, and a bottom row on here. These are highlighted, or these are outlined in red. And then inside those rows, we can start to look at what the elements are. These slides are available online, so I'm going to be running through this fast, and you can definitely look at this later or look at the playground. Looking at this, we have a rounded corner on the top row. We have a previous connection, and then there's nothing special over here. The input row has 1, 2, 3, 4 different things on it, row elements on it, and the bottom row, same as the top basically, rounded corner, next connection. Then we look at spacers. So the pink is just showing where all of those are. Spacers take up all the extra horizontal space inside a row. They're the same height as the row. The height of a row is set by the heights of the elements inside it. Spacers take up extra space. And so if I put it all together, we get this, and every pixel on this block should be covered by one of these rendering elements. And it is, which is nice. Gonna see. So measuring wise, we create a bunch of rows. So we go through everything that's on the block and we create an extra data structure that contains all of these rows and all of these measurables. Once we have created all of those, we don't have any spacing to start. And so that looks like that block on the bottom, that color block that looks kind of gnarly. We add element spacing, and so this starts to broaden that out. That starts to give us a little bit more room around there. Element spacing is defined based on the differences, based on what came before and after a spacer. So we have a whole pile of rules in there, and those rules say that there's a minimum spacing between the start of a row and a label. Those rules also say like 2 field labels in a row should have a very small space between them, but if I have editable inputs or editable fields, those might have more space in between them. Okay, that's done as a single function that computes the element spacing. That's deliberate. It's long, but it's just a bunch of cases returning a single number. So you should be able to read through that and figure out where your rule is, which rule is applying. We compute the bound, so we figure out what's the width of the maximum row, basically. And once we do that, then we actually do some alignment to make sure that all of the rows get padded out to become the right width. All the rows should match in width at the end. And then we also say, hey, we should add some spacing between the rows to make them a little bit taller, make them less compressed. And then we just kind of write down all the values that we've gotten out of that. So remember, at this point, we haven't actually drawn anything. It's just a creation of rectangles. Draw pass, this probably looks pretty familiar. Just taking that and actually putting that out on the screen. There are a lot of steps in here. that's kind of when you look at this, the first thought is probably, hey, can't I combine some of these? Um, as I said before, the goal is to make it really easy to edit, even if that means that there's a little bit more code to look at. Um, and also, all of these are taking place as passes over some data structures that are mostly very, very simple. And so nothing happens with the SVG, that being the most expensive part, until right at the end. Okay, and there should be another slide that says questions. There isn't. I have a few more minutes for questions. I know that was a lot of information dumped right at the end. Go.
On the render info, ask from a child measurement parent, if so, is standard feature.
Question is whether a render info is passed from a child up to a parent, and whether there's a standard way to attach that information. Right now, it isn't. So all the information that goes between a child block and a parent block is still height and width. It has come up, and so that may be something that we add. I would prefer not to pass the entire render info because it's a lot, but I may provide a way of saying this is the object that I will attach to the block that has a little bit of extra hinting about the size. Yeah, and the use case there is text baseline, and so that's one of the really that's one of the examples that makes me think we need some form of that.
The measuring case, like going back and forth sometimes, like trying to measure, trying to decide on heading and stuff like that based on the children, a certain configuration. Like if it's really like basically one pass that you render children, and then you know all the information, it just bubbles up, or whether it's more complicated.
So the question is around whether it's actually one pass across all of the blocks. So each block is
whether it goes like strictly from the inside, so like once you render the block, then just this,
right,
and that's it, and just bubbles up.
Yeah, so whether we still have it set up so when you render a block, you render that and then you bubble that up and render all the rest of them, that's still true. The order of calling rendering is still the same. Yeah. So rendering a block renders all of its parents right now. One thing is that we probably could also, for instance, have some heuristics for whether you actually have to resize a block when one of its children has re-rendered, based on this. I say could and probably. That would take a bit of work. Which parts do I want bug reports on? Anything on Garrus and anything on Thrasos. And Zelos is still too much up in the air. What was that? And APIs. That's an important part of this. We are still hashing out what exactly the APIs are on this beyond the idea that there's a single render call. So getting information back about what was missing. So for instance, I've heard a couple about, can I pass a little bit of extra rendering information up the stack? That sort of information, that sort of need is good to know about. Was that, can custom fields supply render measurement information? Yes, so a field now just says, I take up this much space. That was, can we switch rendering on a per field basis? And Sam said, we may look into it more with Zelos. We aren't doing that yet. I'm going to follow up with you on what exactly that question is.
Based on the answer to my previous question regarding the how you first measure the inner parts and then the outer parts, means that something like a table layout probably will be complicated. Is that correct?
Doing a table layout like within a block?
Yeah. Yeah, like that 2 rows, some fields, only to
the idea is that
align like
Doing alignment, so doing alignment internal with the things that are inside them, inside child blocks as well, may be complicated. But it might, if you're just trying to say, can I line up all of the different child blocks in here so they're aligned a certain way? That's fine because all of that sizing information about the size of the child blocks you have
Make
when
a
you start
maximum of certain
rendering the parent
things
block.
and then use that maximum.
Yeah, exactly.